With all their bumbling around right now, it still does feel though that the FIA have an ultimate target that they want to get to with any kind of set of new regulations. They want to get from point A, which is where we are now with the current set of new regulations, to point Z, which is smaller, nimbler cars with biofueled V8 engines, but feel the need to stop off for every other single letter on the way. When you hear what's being discussed right now about the possible biofuels and the sheer weight and size of the cars and the complexity of their power units being used, you do wonder if they now realise that a U-turn is needed. But the FIA can't perform a 180-degree U-turn because then they will have to own up and admit that they got something wrong. They will have to sell it as a massively complicated, long and expensive process which has many, many points to cover. But the way the FIA have kind of gone about it, it feels like they're driving from London to Paris. They've taken a wrong turn and massively overshot Paris. But rather than admitting you got something wrong, doing a U-turn back into Paris, job done, everyone's happy, they have convinced themselves and everyone around them that the best thing to do now is to drive the whole circumference of the Earth and come back round to Paris. Sure, it might take a little bit longer, but it's a win-win situation because we eventually get to Paris. I don't have to admit that I got something wrong. It's a win-win. Everyone's happy. Now, when I saw the 2026 F1 car concepts that were revealed by the FIA along with the proposed set of new regulations, my thinking was, okay, that car looks kind of better, it's smaller, and it kind of looks a little bit more of what I would expect a Formula 1 car to look like. But also at the same time, I kind of thought, well, I can't wait to see what the 2031 regulations look like, or even the 2036 regulations. Because now it seems that every 5 or 6 years we are treated to a whole host of new sweeping regulations in Formula 1, which then catapults one team out in front, leading to, 3 or 4 years of domination. And just when it looks like the rest of the field are beginning to close this gap and things are starting to equalise again, they throw in another set of rule changes. And the cycle goes on and on and on. Now, I'm not an engineer, nor am I an aerodynamicist, but these persistent, sweeping changes through the regulations need to stop because it kills any natural sense of sort of competition and evolution of engineering. It's not so bad this season, but next year is going to be seen as just sort of a bridge until the new regulations come in 2026. All the teams are just going to be looking at their watches thinking, can 2026 start now, please? Especially Sauber, because they're in a hell of a state right now. Already, 2025 feels like a season that we just need to get through. But what's interesting about the current set of proposed regulations, along with the ones we saw for 2022 when ground effect returned, was that it was tipped to be the saviour of Formula 1. The message was pretty much every weekend we will be blessed with an enormous amount of overtaking. There'll be all this on-track action and cars will be able to follow each other much more closely because all this aerodynamic nastiness that was created before is going to be eliminated by all these new fancy regulation changes. And guess what? It's exactly the same this time around, promising more on-track action, nimbler cars, more overtaking, and we've just kind of heard all this before now. But each time this happens, what the FIA can't seem to get into their head is that in the aerodynamic and engineering departments of these teams, they have some of the finest minds available. And every single time the people in these departments engineer their way out of these aerodynamic cul-de-sacs and loopholes that the FIA seem to put them into. It's that old case of reading the rules once so you understand them, and then reading it a second time so you learn how to get around them. And I think it's that sort of ingenuity that F1 needs to embrace and reward more rather than just banning any kind of solution that these teams and aerodynamicists come up with. It's a bit of a simplistic view, I know, but making the regulations less complex, allowing for more freedom, then possibly the cars will regulate themselves and evolve organically. Now, I'm all down for the FIA tweaking little things here and there just to kind of keep things on the rails, but there's no need for these massive sweeping regulation changes every 4 or 5 years. Surely they would have realised that it didn't yield the results it did last time, so what's to say that it's going to do it exactly this time? And some of the teams and drivers seem to be massively perplexed and confused by these new regulations, and I think they might be worth listening to. Like, it's all good and well getting an artist to design a house, but if an engineer comes in and says, you can't put this there or that won't work, it's probably worth your time listening to the engineer. But for any new regulation change that is cooked up by the FIA and sold to F1 and later on the fans, it has to have some sort of motive that everyone can kind of get behind. Sort of like a manifesto for a political party that wants to get votes and get into power. And it's interesting how the motives for any big or small regulation change has evolved over the years and how it has eventually been sold to F1 and ultimately the fans. For example, from the beginning of F1 in 1950 up until about the late 1990s, the main reason for any kind of sweeping regulation change in F1 was in the name of safety. Safety was the name of the game, it was the priority, and everyone kind of got with this. And this included things like adjustments to the body and the shape of the cars, also things like tyre width and texture. And this is all done for the purpose because they felt the cars were getting too fast. They had to slow the cars down, but it was all done in the name of safety, which is fair enough and pretty honourable in my opinion. Even after Senna and Ratzenberger were killed in 1994, the FIA ruled that teams had to create a hole in the back of the airbox to allow air to pass out the back rather than through the hole at the front and into the engine. And this resulted in less power, slowing the cars down, more safe, job done. I think I've got that right, and if I haven't, please do let me know in the comments. Changes were brought in after that to do with the cockpit and the surrounding part of the driver, but otherwise, engineers were allowed to do their thing, F1 continued doing F1 stuff, and that was pretty much it. Okay, yeah, we got groove tyres for a while, all in the name of slowing the cars down, but in hindsight, was it really that bad? And then around the 2000s, we started to see regulation changes made in the name of entertainment and increasing the amount of overtaking that we saw. Probably a bit of a knee-jerk to the Schumacher-Ferrari dominance that we saw at the time, but it was all about livening up the product, getting rid of the predictability that F1 had become, and just creating a more entertaining thing to watch. And then from around the 2010s up until today, the environmental concerns took hold. And whilst F1 was still all about increasing the amount of action and overtaking and everything on the track, there was also this movement towards environmental stuff and sustainability and being carbon neutral and all that other stuff. And so with that, we got things like KERS, DRS, hybrid V6 engines, and this new push-to-pass system that's going to be coming in 2026. All of which are very clever, of course, and very technologically involved, but all just kind of seem a bit like gimmicks and kind of cheapen the sport. At the end of the day, the FIA and F1 can work together to improve the sport with regulation change, but when you say improve the sport, it depends on who exactly you speak to. To some, that means attracting more manufacturers to F1 with the promise that with the new regulations, they are more in line with the road cars they make, and they'll sell more of them by being just at least an engine supplier. To others, it means more on-track action. Continuous overtaking, wheel-to-wheel stuff. The track won't even have enough cameras to cover the amount of action going on. Continuous wheel-to-wheel action whilst having to do an economy run because you don't have the tyres or the fuel capacity to do so. It just seems like they're fighting against themselves and no one seems to be pulling in the same direction. And you know what? In my mind, my non-engineering simplistic mind, sometimes I think that F1 needs to embrace itself a little bit more. F1 needs to remember how it got to where it is, and it wasn't down to bowing to car manufacturers or the needs of fans that need instant satisfaction. Especially with the car manufacturers, they got involved because it benefited them to be seen on the same page as F1 and compete against other makes in the same market. I know the 2026 regulations are supposed to give us a sense of joy and optimism, but from what we've seen in the last 10, 20 years, I'm really not so sure. Each time it's happened has led to domination from a single team, and that is something that F1 does absolutely not need right now. Another 3 or 4 years of domination from a single driver or team could cause massive harm to the sport. And yes, I know the figures show that F1 is more popular than ever, numbers are through the roof, and there are more eyes on the product than ever before. Call me a negative Nigel if you want, but I just don't think that is going to last. No line goes up forever. I absolutely love Formula One, and I will continue to do so whatever form it takes. But when you consider the growing negativity towards things like Drive to Survive, combined with the potential domination of a single team from new regulation changes, I think there's a chance that people may switch off. Like I said, I'm not trying to hate or anything, but thinking that a line and a rise will just continuously go up and up and up forever is just unrealistic. And so with that, it's going to be interesting to see what these new regulations bring us. But these sweeping changes every 5 or 6 years just need to stop. Find a setup that works, stick with it, and tweak it here and there as when needed. Just little tiny tweaks. From what I understand, if you talk to most F1 fans and even the drivers that you see in interviews as well, I think F1 would benefit from embracing a more sort of traditional view of itself. You know, stop messing around with these little feeble rule changes and new regulations and put put the show back together that everybody wants to see. Why is it, do you think, when teams do these demo runs in cities and tracks, they wheel out these V8 cars that they've got with modern livery designs rather than use the V6 stuff? Because the V6 stuff just doesn't impress anybody. So therefore, the show that everybody wants are these smaller, lighter, nimbler cars, freedom with engine sizes, refueling, tyres that can be pushed hard, and drivers pushing the very limits of their capabilities, and show the whole world why they're in Formula One. And so there we go. I know it's not often I do a rant video, but I felt that just needed to be said. So are you looking forward to the new regulation changes? Would you prefer to keep the current ones we have? Or are you looking forward to the new 2026 ones? Are you looking forward to seeing what they have to offer? Please let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe as always. And I'm Paul, and I'll see you later. Cheers.